it was just completely enraging. I've had 10 years of being harassed by these dangerous men, and here was the place to do it again. They came to my house when I was still married and really frightened my wife. And now, 8-9 years later, they're still working for the same small group of men. It's a literal criminal gang that is controlling the police. All they had to say was Graham Linehan is not a bigot. Of course women need fair sports. Of course women need single-sex spaces. Of course we shouldn't be mutilating children in gender clinics. But that was beyond them. Anyone who wasn't fighting this stuff, actively fighting it, was complicit in it.
If you've ever started your own business, you'll know just how tricky and time-consuming it can be. It's a bit like being a writer. There can be late nights, a never-ending to-do list, and responsibilities that, no matter what, fall squarely on you. Luckily, if you're starting a business or already have one, you can easily lighten the load and get all the support you need with Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform launching millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands that are just getting started. It really is a game changer. The best thing about Shopify is how easy it makes getting started, regardless of your business experience. It helps you build a beautiful online store that's perfectly tailored to your brand, with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. You don't need any design experience at all. Shopify also comes with plenty of helpful AI tools. This can sharpen up every aspect of your business, like writing headlines and product descriptions, and even improving your photography. Of course, none of this is much good unless you get the word out there, and here Shopify has your back too. You can easily create email and social media campaigns so your brand will be seen wherever your future customers are scrolling. Along with all of this, Shopify offers expert advice in all things business. Any questions you have, from shipping to returns, it's here to help with just about everything. So if you're ready to sell, then you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into cash with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your £1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.co.uk/Brendan. Go to shopify.co.uk/Brendan to start selling today. Shopify.co.uk/Brendan. Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Graham Linehan. Graham, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brendan. How's it going?
Good, thanks. I should say welcome back to the show. You were on just a few weeks back and you very prophetically said that Britain is no longer a good place for you, no longer somewhere you feel free to be able to say what you want to say or to work in the way you want to work. And that was proven incredibly true. I almost said violently true when you arrived at Heathrow and were arrested by 5 armed cops over 3 tweets. And this is a global story. I think this is whoever's eyes were still closed to the free speech crisis in Britain. They've now been, torn open by this. It's really gone around the world. So what's the situation with you now? How has that panned out? How are you feeling about it? What's going on with that?
Well, I think sometimes people are looking at this the wrong way. Yes, it's definitely a free speech issue, but it's also an issue of, and I'm not saying this lightly, Brendan. I've known this for 10 years, and I've been the victim of these people for 10 years. But it's a literal criminal gang that is controlling the police. It is a criminal gang made up of a group of men, some of whom are transsexuals, but others are just cross-dressers. Even after the embarrassment of what they did the other day to me, this morning they imposed bail conditions on someone I know, an autistic guy, who was arrested again by 5 tooled-up police in front of his parents, And now he's been told that he can't publicize his crowdfunder. So I'll be publicizing it for him. My bail conditions were very, very bizarre and go to how screwed up the police are at the moment. They told me that I wasn't allowed to mention the victim of my 3 tweets. And there was no victim in my 3 tweets. There were 3 jokes, unless he wants to, or one statement where I said, I hate them. I hate them, homophobes and misogynists. Now you think that would let me off the hook for the crime they're accusing me of, um, but it hasn't, and they're still able to use the police as kind of errand boys. So the only kind of positive thing that came from, oh, but by the way, we told them that since they weren't precise about who I'm not supposed to mention, we're just ignoring those bail conditions, because they make no sense. And also, we believe the arrest was illegal. Even though it's brought a lot of attention to it, these guys are still operating, and they are very dangerous. I know that one of them released my home address online, which they share between them. And when I say my home address, I don't mean my address in America. I mean my family's address where I used to live. So I'm in a situation now where I was going to call the police in Norwich and say, listen, could you just put my family's house on a route so that policeman will, a police car will pass by it every so often. And my lawyer said, I can, but they will not do it. They simply do not take these things seriously. They do not understand the issue. They believe everything that these men tell them, and they don't think that they're a serious threat. And yeah, they're just a dangerous criminal gang, and the police in the UK are working for them as if they were all chief superintendents.
That's one of the things that has shocked so many people, that the police have been the co-option of the police by trans activism, by gender lunacy. Not only do the police think these stupid things about sex and gender, but they also enforce them at the behest of whoever's making a vexatious complaint. I wanted to ask you you've talked about this a lot. You wrote about it brilliantly. It's featured in all the newspapers around the world, including the front page of the Sun. I was very happy to see that.
Yeah.
Britain's Fecht, it said, which was, I think, a work of art. Um, but just indulge me one more time to just tell us what it was like when you saw those police coming to you. What was it like when they started grilling you? Has your blood pressure gone down? I'm very curious to know that. What was that like, that experience?
Well, it was just completely enraging. I've had 10 years being harassed by these dangerous men, and here was the police to do it again. They came to my house when I was still married and really frightened my wife. It was one of the things that led to our breakdown, or breakup, excuse me. Um, and now 8, 9 years later, they're still working for the same small group of men. So I was enraged. I was absolutely enraged. And whe but when I saw the tweets, I sort of started laughing because, like, the punch him in the balls one, how can you punch a woman in the balls, you know? You know what I mean? The hating misogynists and homophobes, how is it a crime to hate misogynists and homophobes? And the last one of, trans activists smell, well, they do. They do. A couple of times in the gallery during my recent trial, people had to leave, you know? So I'm not saying these things randomly. I'm not being hyperbolic. I am, just telling the truth. And the police have had, like everyone else in the UK, had 8 years to 10 years of conditioning by people like the BBC, which refuses to report on this issue properly. So most people aren't aware that anything is going on. But of course, it's for the last 8 years, or 10 years, it's been an all-out war on women's rights in the UK, and hopefully, my arrest will just make people wake up to that a little bit.
I did want to ask you about that. I mean, the tweets you were questioned over, it's beyond absurd. I think most normal people can see that. Except it seems Zach Polanski of the Green Party said something like, it's completely unacceptable to say we should punch women in the balls. Can you hear yourselves talk, these people? Um,
Yeah, James O'Brien said I should have been arrested as well.
Insane. That one about punching women in the balls. I mean, to most normal people, that's obviously a comedic observation of the fact that these blokes claim to be women and yet they've got testicles which you could punch if you wanted to. But also, it really struck me that that's actually the kind of advice that dads have been giving their daughters for a very long time, which is if you encounter a creep, he's being a bit weird, kick him in the balls, get away from him. That used to be seen as good advice for young girls and women in particular. And now it seems it's a potential hate crime. It's completely
Yeah.
bizarre.
They are trying to make women as unsafe as they possibly can. They're taking away their single sex spaces, and then they're doing something even more disturbing. A lot of women now know that if there is a strange man in the toilets and they complain about it, they might be arrested. They might get into trouble. And I mean, we saw the Wee Spa in America, which was a spa that a sex offender started taking his clothes off. This was a mixed of female spa, so women were there with their kids, and a sex offender was strolling around saying he's a woman and getting his jollies from it. And there was a famous film of her going down to complain,
Yeah.
and a hipster telling her to chill, and that it's just how he feels, man. And the guy was a wanted sex offender. So that's what I'm very frightened of in the UK. And there was a famous poster in one college that was hung up in the girls' bathroom. The poster said, "If you see someone that doesn't look like they should be here, don't make a fuss, don't make a scene. They're just where they feel comfortable." Now, have you ever heard worse advice to give to a young woman who might be left alone with these men, who they don't know is a good person or a bad person until they get raped? That's what I call the rape test. We're supposed to accept that every man who goes into a woman's toilet belongs there, when in fact, of course, any man who wants to go into a woman's toilet, it's the last person who should be allowed in a woman's toilet. And I do include trans women in that. There's a lot of decent trans-identified people out there who don't use female spaces and who don't campaign for men in women's sports. And they're disgusted at what's being done in their name. Absolutely disgusted. They're having their rights that they built up for, years. Not always comfortably with women, but at least there was some sort of détente, I guess. And that's been totally destroyed. That's been to any trust that once existed between women and transsexuals has been destroyed by trans activists. I think third spaces is probably the answer. And again, you will spot the bad actors by how they react to the idea of third spaces.
That is such an important point, that this is pretty much the only area of life where women are told not to make a fuss if they see something suspicious. Everywhere else, we're told to make a fuss. If you see an empty bag at the airport, or if you see someone looking shifty on a train, they say, phone this number, tell the police. This is the one case when it comes to women's safety, women's bathrooms, women's changing rooms, where they're told the precise opposite. Say nothing, do nothing, just sit around and put up with it. I mean, that really does capture the misogyny at the heart of all of this.
The only thing that because women are on average smaller and, compared to most men, like balsa wood, you've seen the videos of men just picking women up and trying to put them into the back of a van. You've seen all of that. There's a huge physical advantage that men have over women. And the only thing women have in that situation, or in that kind of in that situation, is the ability to make a fuss. Men don't like it when these men don't like it when other women become involved, when staff becomes involved. But as I say, that power has been just taken from women because they don't know whether the staff will come along and call her a bigot and call the police on her. We have a like this to my mind, this has all been an overcorrection after the McPherson report that Stonewall very cynically took advantage of. They knew the police were humiliated by being called institutionally racist. So they pretended to the police that there was a wonderful new group of people who they could be extra nice to, and that would make up for all their crimes or their problems in the past. But of course, what they've done is they've switched from being institutionally racist to institutionally misogynist. You know, Like my story is just one of hundreds of women who have been let down by the police in this country. I have reported this criminal gang that I've been talking to you about several times to the police. Nothing is ever done. They're terrified of these men because they think that there's going to be, I guess they think there's going to be some sort of equivalent to the McPherson report, and they'll be found to be transphobic. This completely fake phobia, this completely fake bigotry that they're trying to make us feel guilty about. So it's a pretty bad situation for the police. I'm 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 astonished that my case, that I haven't yet been told no further action, and I received an apology. It's extraordinary to me that they think that this case is going to go anywhere. I mean, we are going to sue them, as I said at the airport, into the ground on this. And they seem to be walking into this humiliation, just very confidently. And there's even a chance I might get arrested at the airport again, because as I say, I may be breaking the bail conditions that they thought were clear enough for me to follow.
It's complete insanity. I think there are millions of people out there, including the listeners to this podcast, who support you breaking these ridiculous Stalinist bail conditions. And of course, who recognize that your arrest was completely illegal, not to mention immoral and ridiculous and perverse. Um, I wanted to, just on your case, because the world is interested in it very much. It is, as you said earlier, it is very much a free speech issue. It's great that the Free Speech Union is in your corner, and lots of other liberal, traditionally, properly liberal-minded people are as well. What have been the repercussions of what happened to you? We know that even Keir Starmer felt compelled to comment on it, even the head of the Metropolitan Police. It's made its way to America. It's been reported around the world. Uh, what do you think the fallout will be for Britain of the fact that they dare to do this to, if I might say so, a one-time national treasure who they're now humiliating at airports? What do you think will the fallout be?
Yeah, well, I think it's just made very clear what we've been saying for years about free speech in the UK. It doesn't really exist at the moment. It's entirely up to a group of. I mean, again, look at my three tweets. The fact that the misogyny and homophobic one was
Yeah,
chosen just shows that they can barely read.
yeah.
They can barely read. I kind of expected, if not a resignation, at least a walk back of what's happened. But there's been nothing. But they've made me famous over here. It means that more doors will open to me over here. Feel a bit more. I feel a bit more. I feel a bit safer here, of course, now that some very powerful people have their eye on the situation. Um, but I still have to come back in a month, go to the last day of my trial. In some ways, it's changed. In other ways, it's just another day at the office.
Yeah. One thing that it made me think is that when I saw, especially the front page of the Sun, but the front page of all the papers, and the commentary even from Starmer and people like that, it made me think that the day when celebrities and the activist class might have to walk back what they've been saying and doing, it feels like that day is coming closer. It feels like there's going to be a breaking point for all these people who either shrugged their shoulders and looked the other way as women's rights were being plundered, who abandoned you famously, and we've talked about that before, and you've written about that at length, turned their back on you or called you a bigot and went along with all of that. Um, do you feel, and we don't have to name names, but there are many of them, and you know a lot of them personally, or you used to. Do you feel that day is coming? And if it is, how generous are you feeling towards these people? How forgiving might you be or not?
I don't know. I think about that a lot. Like no one called me about my arrest. No one from the old life. Arthur Matthews. No one called me. So I just feel like they've had multiple chances. But the thing that I find, the worst thing about them is their behavior at the start. They're distancing themselves from me. They're not standing up for me. As I always say, I say this over and over. All they had to say was Graham Linehan is not a bigot. Of course, women need fair sports. Of course, women need single sex spaces. Of course, we shouldn't be mutilating children in gender clinics. But that was beyond them. And all these people probably think of themselves as good people, you know, but they just let it happen. And I sometimes compare it to, I think when the final bill comes in for what's been happening to children, like, you know, thousands of girls with double mastectomies, thousands of girls entering menopause too early, all the lawsuits that are going to come from that. The way I see it is like, you know, they're going to have to look at their work, you know, because anyone who wasn't fighting this stuff, actively fighting it, was complicit in it, you know, and there's no like there's I don't know how you need more proof that what is happening in gender clinics is a crime against humanity, you know. So I will accept. I will try to be as what's that word? You know, forgiving. Magnanimous, that's the word. I would try to be as magnanimous as possible, but I don't think I will ever respect any of those people again. I can't li I mean, you know, I used to love the Divine Comedy, Neil Hannon. We were friends for most of my life, most of my adult life, and, I just can't listen to him anymore because I know that he didn't care about the women in his life enough to put up a fight for them, and he certainly didn't care enough about me to put up a fight for me.
It's so striking to me that a lot of these people that we're thinking about, imagine that they would have been on the right side of the McCarthyite panic in 1950s America. They think they would have been on the right side in the GDR when the Stasi was arresting writers for what they said and what they thought. And now a writer is literally being arrested for making jokes, for thinking that women deserve rights, and they are saying nothing. So if you want to know how you would have behaved in the GDR in the 1970s, it's how you're behaving right now.
Yeah.
And how do you think, why do you think that happened to these people? I mean, these are people who are in the arts world, in the comedy world. They're generally seen as open-minded, a bit experimental, in favor of artistic freedom. And yet, when this issue came along, they buried their heads in the sand, or they went along with it, and they turned a blind eye to the extreme authoritarianism that came in on the back of this. What did they just feel scared that they had to go along with it? How do you explain that level of conformism?
It's a hard one. I think different people have different stories. Like, for instance, I think Alistair Campbell is a great example of this kind of lazy thinking. You saw he got into trouble over his comments about Charlie Kirk. He basically repeated and what I call an NPC talking point. NPC talking points are talking points you see like, oh, you know, that's a great example. He advocated stoning for gays. It's not true, but it's an NPC talking point. It's shared among so many people that someone who's not paying attention, someone as dozy as Campbell, will just repeat it without giving it a second's thought. You know, um, and I think that in Campbell's case, it's because his daughter is a trans activist, and his is leading him by the fucking, you know, ring through his nose on all these issues. And I think there's a lot of people, a lot of men who are in the same situation. They don't think it's serious enough to confront. And that's usually because their wife or their kids is telling them not to. Now, I think that like that's not to say I'm putting the blame on women, but a lot of the thing about this movement is that it hits women a lot harder than it does men. You know, if someone is in a relationship and their wife is saying, "No, don't say anything," then that's because her whole social her all her social circles could disappear overnight. If so I think there's a lot of fear. They may not even be able to express it in those terms, but, yeah, it was kind of I think it was known that if you draw attention to yourself on the internet, uh, they will be able to destroy your life as they did mine. And, what happens is when you become public enemy, you suddenly realize how vulnerable you are. You know, like we had our address on Company's House, and that's how trans activists found it and published it. Of course, I never before then I never thought anyone would be so evil, but you know, I crossed these men. So uh, yeah, people are probably scared of the unknown, scared of what will happen if they take a step. But you know, I stood up to my wife and my kids on this. I said, no, it's not right. It's not right, And they, my kids have come to understand what I'm saying, and they're getting a really clear picture of what's going on now. But like, you've got to do the right thing, even if it makes the people in your life uncomfortable. And if someone like Charlie Brooker or Chris Morris or any of these people, if they had come out and said, Graham Linehan's not a bigot, of course women need single-sex spaces, etc., then they could have changed the whole trajectory of my life. They could have saved me from spending 8 years being beaten up in the dark by these crazy men. But in the end, their own comfort took precedence. And I do understand it to some extent. As I say, I do think that, the women, the wives, they do risk more than the men, you know? But the other thing, and this is not as forgivable, is some of them actually believe it, you know? Some of them actually believe that men are women. And also all these people are very well off, and they'll never have to use a women's shelter. And they'll never have to use a rape crisis center, God willing, And they simply don't understand the absolute crucial nature of safeguarding in those types of spaces, because their experience of gender neutral toilets, as I said, I think before, is Groucho Club, where they pop in with a mate to take cocaine, you know, like that's what they think of when they think of gender neutral toilets. What's the problem? I'm always in there, with a man. And they're just so removed from the real world that they forget that there's very vulnerable women out there who need protection from any man who would like to enter a women's space, uh, for a reason other than getting high.
I want to come back to the Charlie Kirk question in just a minute, but one more question on the fallout from your arrest. I did want to ask you about on the right side of this issue, which you are on, and Spiked is on, and people we know are on as well. Even on that side of it, there are people who see you as a controversial figure. You'll be well aware of that. And I'm thinking of Janice Turner's piece in the Times after your arrest, where she basically said you're a pain in the arse, if we're going to paraphrase it. I thought it was a very ungenerous piece, if I'm going to be honest. But there are certain so-called TERFs who do have that view. Does that bother you, or are you just content with all the women and men who are on your side in this fight?
Oh yeah, I'm totally content with the people who are on my side. Janet Turner made sure she got my book to give it a bad review as well, because she just doesn't like me. I wrote her a letter once saying, "Hey, you blocked me. What's going on?" And she wrote this kind of splenetic letter back, spitting all sorts of accusations. And I don't know where they came from. I think it's something to do with the fact that there was a WhatsApp group back when I was really, really suffering, when things were really falling apart. I got the same letters from Helen Lewis and Sarah Ditum, and I think they're all in the same WhatsApp group, and they all just decided that I was not behaving according to their standards. And I found out later that the real thing they didn't like was because I won't use preferred pronouns. Helen Lewis used preferred pronouns for Iman Khelif after he was found to be a man. So these are people who I think they worship politeness over anything else. That's the thing. They think it can all get done by being polite and by writing columns every couple of months about the issue. And I disagree with that. I think we're up against a domestic terror organization. I think the attack on the LGB Alliance conference was a domestic terror attack. I think the kids were used by older men to escape any police action. And it happened in the heart of Westminster, and no one cared. It was barely a news story. There's an attack on LGBT people in the heart of London. So, the people who are saying that I'm not being polite enough simply don't understand the threat. These are dangerous men. Not, as I often say, not just men, the worst men, the worst men. The other thing that these polite journalists missed is that I was under 24-hour assault from these people, and I was losing everything, including my musical. my marriage, and they took that moment to finger wag me, you know? So, some of the worst things that have been done to me have been done to me by people on my side. But, some of it I understand because a lot of some of the women in this fight have been very badly treated by men, and they don't like men, even those on their side, and I just try and stay out of their way because I understand what they've been through. Um, but for the most part, ordinary people, the vast majority of rad femmes who I meet when I go to a Let Women Speak event or something like that, they're very happy with my bull in a china shop approach.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of people are. Why on earth would you be polite to people who say we'll piss where we want, as well
Yeah.
as their placate, or death to turfs or whatever else it might be? I mean, these are not people who have earned politeness or respect, and certainly not. They have certainly haven't earned the use of preferred pronouns, which I think if you sacrifice that, you kind of sacrifice the whole thing. That's the
Oh,
issue
yeah.
there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons this debate has got so, I mean, not debate, this movement has got so far is because they're deliberately obtuse with the way they use language. So woman means its opposite. Trans man means its opposite. In fact, I always tell people trans in front of a word means the opposite to the word. So, it's a handy guide. But a lot of people, when they, a lot of if they did a poll and they found out that most people, when they hear the word trans woman, they're thinking of a female. So they think that women are saying that certain women shouldn't be allowed in the women's toilets. So this is how this movement advanced it through subterfuge, through muddy language, through these NPC talking points, and it's just gripped the world because most people understandably, they just want an easy life. They don't want to think about these issues. Don't want to think about who is and who has and who hasn't had an operation, even though 95% of these men do not have an operation. And so they leave it to others, and they think nothing is going on. They think it's not an emergency because the BBC is telling them it's not an emergency. In fact, the BBC is still putting transvestites on shows like Only Connect. Everywhere they can, they put a transvestite to try and make us all feel that this is normal. And it's an incredibly demoralizing thing for women.
The BBC has a lot to answer for on so many issues right now. Trans, Israel, I mean, so many things that they're just pumping essentially misinformation into people's homes every single day of the week. Graham, before you go, I did want to ask you about the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk, um, which lots of people witnessed. It's on the internet. It's absolutely grotesque. I mean, we don't know all the details of what this guy was thinking when he allegedly pulled the trigger. There does seem to be some kind of trans influence. There does seem to be some kind of so-called anti-fascist influence. What was your response to that? I mean, are we witnessing the militarization of cancel culture? Is there reason for other people to be worried now about speaking, especially on campuses?
Oh gosh, well, yeah, I guess security is obviously going to go up for everyone. I guess my worry is that you know people need to know that it's not just people who like Charlie Kirk, who was a very active Republican. I mean, that's putting it mildly. But it's also women like, well, I don't want to name any names in case I put a target on them, but a lot of women who are flying under the radar because this issue still isn't mainstream. They're even less likely now to go, and we've had Antifa types threatening them, trying to drown them out for years. And now we know that that it's very possible that one of them could just decide to turn to violence. But again, this is the fault of people like Alistair Campbell and media talking heads and the news agents and all this sort of stuff. Because for years they've been either ignoring this issue, saying the party line, which is that this is a group of vulnerable people, um, or actively participating in calling people conservatives and people on the right as fascists and
Yeah.
Nazis and bigots, and this is and also the something that if you're involved in this discourse, very well, phrases like trans Holocaust, phrases like armed trans people, this has always been uh, a sort of pseudo military movement. And the hilarious thing is these violent men can pick up guns and then claim that women are being armed, you know? So it's like it's people just have to wake up. And I think the great thing about Charlie, the only good thing about what happened to Charlie Kirk is it just woke I think it's woken America up. To come just after my arrest, especially, like, not to say it had anything near the same kind of significance, but the two things together are really making people think, hang on a sec, these people are a problem. They're not a waif-like race. The way people like the news agents talk about them, you'd think they were a race of hobbits, It's like there's some vulnerable people in there, but they're far outnumbered by a sort of frenzied left-wing mind virus, which is in which they've long been convinced that conservatives want to kill them. They've long been convinced that words are violence, and so we're kind of reaping the whirlwind here, because we let this kind of discourse go on too long, and it was approached too uncritically by the people who are supposed to be informing us.
Yeah, that is incredibly well put. Graham, my very last question for you before we let you go is, we can't talk about one of your court cases, but I just want to ask you. I just want to ask you where things are at with the Heathrow thing. I mean, you're surprised it hasn't been walked back. There hasn't been an apology. Are you expecting that it will just fall apart? And how successful do you think you will be when you sue the cops? Because you definitely have people cheering you on. What would you do that?
I really don't know about the success of the thing. The Free Speech Union suggested it, so I presume it has a good chance of success. But like the thing about the arrest at Heathrow is, like, this guy who was arrested in front of his family, this autistic guy was arrested in front of his family. They've told him he can't share his fundraiser. How sinister is that? And so uh, you know, the as we always say, the process is the punishment. I don't know how likely it is to keep going forward, but um, at the moment they haven't called it off. So I guess they're just going to go through it. And I, I as time goes on, I think I'm going to get more comfortable sitting in the dock, and I'm going to get more used to it. So the process won't quite be the punishment because I get a free trip home, I get to see my kids, and I get to meet a lot of lovely people who support me. So swings and roundabouts, as they say.
Graham, thank you very much.